Hey guys, how's it going? It's Self-Dev, welcome back to another video. So in this video I wanted to talk about optimism and how to be healthy in terms of optimism and thinking positively about future possibilities and leaning towards the actual positive future possibilities and sort of not necessarily ignoring the negative possibilities, but just not really focusing on them. So trying to put them at the back of your mind. So there are healthy and unhealthy ways of doing this. And I've basically come up with 5 points on how to make sure you are optimistic in a healthy way, because there are unhealthy ways that will get you into trouble, usually emotionally. So the first one is to not ignore facts. So if certain facts about the future event leans more towards negativity, more towards pessimism, then it would be a little bit foolish if you were to be optimistic and basically ignore those facts that are leaning more towards a negative outcome. So while that's not to say that those facts that point more towards a negative future outcome mean that the optimistic outcome or outcomes that you are visualizing won't happen, because they still might, but it's just something to basically prepare in the back of your mind that maybe this optimistic outcome that you have visioned might not happen. And these facts, they suggest that what might be more likely to happen is a more negative situation, but that doesn't mean that it's a foregone conclusion, because it isn't. Your optimistic view of the future might indeed happen, but it's just something to be aware of. And especially when you're like a leader of a group, you want to make sure that they know the facts and that you're not trying to hide them from them, or trying to I guess minimize the negative facts and just show them the more optimistic and positive potential possibilities of the future, which in this case might be you not telling them anything negative when actually the evidence of potential negative future possibilities outweigh the positive. You need to make sure that your reasons for being optimistic in a rational way are displayed to the other people, and your reasoning for it is also displayed to the other people, so that you don't have to keep things from them in order to keep them optimistic and keep their hopes up. So I hope that made sense. So that's the first point. So the second point would be to, if the thing you're optimistic about is in your control, then you need to make sure that you are actually acting and actually doing things to make the optimistic visions of the future actually happen. Because if you're just optimistic that, let's say you're starting a business and you're optimistic that it will succeed and earn millions and millions of dollars, then optimism isn't enough, because you need to actually do the work to make that happen. Because if you don't, then it's a completely irrational view of optimism. You can't just think happy and positively in order to manifest it. So you need to put the work in, otherwise it's just not going to work. So yeah, it might be obvious, it might not be obvious, but it's something that I thought needed to be said. So the third point would be to only be optimistic if both outcomes are about the same likeliness as each other. Um, it kind of ties in with my first point, but ideally you want them to be kind of equal and balanced, and if they're not, then you need to make sure you're prepared for or be especially prepared, because you have to be prepared anyway, but to be especially prepared for the negative outcomes to happen. And the more in balance the positive and the negative potential outcomes are, and remember my first point about the evidence, the more imbalanced they are, the more prepared you have to be for the other outcome to happen. So if there's a lot of evidence of something negative happening, then you can still be optimistic, but you need to make sure that you are prepared and you have made your group prepared if you are in the leader role, that they are prepared that something negative might happen. And if you are too positive, too optimistic, and you aren't preparing them for the negative outcome, then that could cause all sorts of problems that I won't even mention here. So it depends on the situation, but as long as you give them enough information, factual information, as well as your optimistic thoughts and reasons why things could still be good, even though the negative outcomes, negative possibilities outweigh the positive, then yeah. So the fourth one is to let other people have an input. So even though you think you've pretty much mastered the first 3 points, it would be wise to let other people offer their 2 cents as to what they think is more likely, or how optimistic or pessimistic they are. Now, obviously, there are people who are just generally optimistic people. I tend to be one of those people, and I try to follow what I'm teaching here in this video as well. So I'm not, or at least I try not to be too blindly optimistic. But at the same time, I think it's wise to let other people offer their opinions on what is likely to happen, if it's good or bad, and so on. And of course, people are different. Some are more pessimistic about the future. So if you're in a certain situation and you're trying to get a second opinion on how optimistic or pessimistic things might be for a certain situation, then if you know about this person's life history and their history of how they usually are, if they're usually optimistic or pessimistic, then that's something to be considered. So if they're like usually pessimistic and they're pessimistic this time, then consider that this person might be a little bit unreliable in terms of their opinion, but also if they're telling you like facts, as I've been saying earlier on in the video, then that's really something you should listen to. And again, if they're overly optimistic, then find other people who are maybe a bit more pessimistic, but again, try to look at the facts, because they will really help you decide how optimistic or pessimistic you should be. And the last point, which kind of ties everything together, is to not get your hopes up or down. So again, you're your optimism and pessimism aren't factual, they're just your emotional predictions about the future, I guess, is one way you could put it. So always prepare for the possibility that you are going to be wrong. Um, I guess some people might like to prefer to be pessimistic because then the only way is up, and that kind of makes sense. But that also means in the present you are kind of sacrificing your emotional well-being, and that's not very ideal. So there is no preferable option to being more optimistic or pessimistic. Um, so yeah, as long as you prepare for being wrong, then there's not really a problem um, of trying to be too optimistic or pessimistic. So as long as you're not too, I guess, biased on either side, you won't end up with that crash, um, or that shock that things are good. Because sometimes you might be so pessimistic about something that when it turns out that the outcome is very positive for you, you might be like so surprised that you just can't quite believe it, and that may end up causing problems, although not as many problems as being too optimistic and then things turning out really badly for you. But there is, as I said earlier, you can hurt your present emotional state if you are too pessimistic. And if you have a pessimistic lifestyle, then, as I keep saying, if you focus more on the factual information, then you can lean yourself to be more optimistic. And if the factual information leans more pessimistic, then what I would say is that you might not know enough information, because there will be some amount of information that leans on both sides. So there's some information that if you really concentrated yourself on would make you more optimistic, and some information that you would look at in order to be pessimistic. So the main point really is to usually be optimistic, but to be optimistic sensibly, and to not be ill prepared for a negative outcome. So yeah, that's pretty much it for my videos. So if you liked it, please like, subscribe, comment, click on the bell, share with someone who's maybe too optimistic or too pessimistic, or someone who you think will potentially enjoy the video. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have an awesome day and an amazing life.